So this video, I'm recording this video in 2023 as an introduction for a conversation that I had with Tiberio. This was an interview that I conducted in 2021, actually. At a time, I was just starting to think about the Sciencepreneur community. At the time, I was calling it the Scientrepreneur community. I struggle like a pronouncing those names. Entrepreneur, it's almost impossible for me. So that's one of the reasons why um, I moved from Scientrepreneur to Sciencepreneur. It's easier for me. The other reason being that we got the sciencepreneur.com domain, which was not a, and for the Scientrepreneur wasn't available. At the end of, I think the Sciencepreneur is better than Scientrepreneur. Well, the reason well, this the reason of this video is to introduce Tiberio or Tiberio, and and I think this is a very important interview because it's related to ethics in venture building. And if you look out there and like at the in the investing community, the entrepreneurial community, they are almost never discussing the ethics of what they're creating, right? As venture builders, we are always creating things, and we are responsible for what we create. That's at least that's my understanding. That's my take for any kind of creation. So venture building is not different. We are responsible for what we create, and people want to have an impact, right, in the world, have an impact in life. They're usually more concerned about having the impact rather than a positive impact. So you notice that all the time because the impact is measured by metrics such as revenue, user acquisition, and that kind of thing. But is your product bringing like a positive thing to the world? In general, you people kind of assume it is because if there is a market like consuming that product, then by almost it's almost a direct conclusion that if there is a market, it has a benefit to it. But when I did my MBA, I got a scholarship from this trio of billionaires in Brazil, and they became very rich selling beer like in Brazil, which is a country that struggles a lot, and alcohol is a huge health issue like in the country. Not only a health issue but like accidents, road accidents happening because of alcohol, people killing each other because of that. So, and of course there is a market there is like a huge consumer market for beer in Brazil. It's a big country with lots of people, a hot country, and people really love like a very cold beer. And it's not that I'm against beer or like I have like a position against that, but I never really saw them discussing the ethics of selling beer, right? Or how can you mitigate the negative effects of your business? Uh, and I think that's so important. That's my personal take. You might not agree with that, but and it has the downside of thinking of the ethics of what you're building is that you get more restricted in what you can do and how you do things, right? If you are like a drug dealer, you don't have those concerns or preoccupations. You just be selling your product because there is a market for it, right? But then there is people who just abide by the law. The law prohibits drugs. Okay, so I'm not gonna sell drugs. Anything that is barely legal, I'm game. I think we should have like a bit of a higher bar for that. That's my personal opinion again. And even some venture ideas that I have and that I intend to develop in the future, they are not necessarily a consensus when it comes to the ethics of that. So I don't want to. I think it is very important to separate ethics from morals. Like morals is one thing, it's more like what it comes from religion, from society, like those preconceived ideas. Whereas ethics is an active, thoughtful process of understanding the overall greater benefit or um, malefice that you are causing to people like you, right? To your community, to your society. So those that's important, and I think this is one of like a because we think of that, we think of ethics, and we discuss that, we ponder pros and cons of doing certain things and taking certain strategies. I think that's one of the things that differentiates us as a community from what's going on out there, and. And there's going if you like as a community, if you guys like these discussions, I think there isn't gonna be a lack of opportunities for us to discuss. Like every business idea that we discuss here in the Sciencepreneur community can be can and should be discussed from an ethical perspective, and having that understanding and that discussion going on, I think it's going to be super positive for all of us. So without further ado, I'm going to transition here to the conversation with Tiberio. Thank you.
Hello, today I have the pleasure of speaking with Tiberio, which is an old friend, someone who has inspired me along my career several times. Uh, and, uh, and Tiberio is not only a scientist, as we expect in this channel, he's also an entrepreneur. So welcome, Tiberio.
Thank you, Daniel. Very happy to be here with you.
I'm super happy to have you here as well. So why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about your story, your education, your where you're coming from, what kind of research you used to do, like your scientific story to get started with.
Yeah, so my scientific background, I think it goes back to teenage years when I discovered that I like to ask questions about the universe and think about big questions like where did we come from, why are we here, where are we going to, those kind of big questions that scientists usually start to ask very early on in their lives. So I suppose when I was a child, I was very much thinking and asking those kinds of questions. And then when I decided what to do at uni, I decided to study electrical engineering, which seemed like a good combination of scientific exploration, also practical utility and ways to actually have a practical impact. Well, then I did a degree in electrical engineering, but during that degree, I found that I really had this very strong passion for more fundamental science and physics specifically. So I started doing research as a research assistant in the physics department at my uni back in South Brazil, where I studied, and that was a revelation. Once I started to do research under the guidance of the professors at the physics department, I was still a teenager. I wasn't even 20, and I was already having these opportunities to work with researchers who are simulating particle accelerators, trying to understand the stability of electrons in certain orbits in particle accelerators, that sort of stuff. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And then that's how it all started. And from that point onwards, I realized I really want to understand how things work from a quantitative perspective. I want to measure things. I want to measure the universe. I want to and I want to be able to understand how the world works, and hopefully that will be good for something, right? So that's how it all kind of started. Once I finished my engineering degree, I got a job at a American company at the time in the area of nuclear medicine, which really brought together the sort of engineering aspects and the physics aspects I used to calibrate this nuclear medicine equipment, which is very complex, involves a lot of knowledge of physics and so on, but also had to fix them when they broke. So involved knowledge of both hardware and software, had to do a lot of very sort of broad kind of work involving both science and engineering. And after a few years, I sort of realized, oh, this is really good. I'm really doing something interesting here, but I feel like I want to go deeper into research. And then I decided to do a PhD. And at the time, this was early 2000s, very early in the 2000s, decided to pursue a PhD.
It all started with extreme curiosity, right? And like this quest to understand perhaps the nature of reality, from your physics research. And yeah,
that's right. The curiosity, and also in my home environment, my dad used to teach physics as well. It was a lecturer in physics at uni at some point in his career, and that was also something that sort of caught my attention. That you start to asking questions, that sort of thing, and you get interested in. And yes, I was really thrilled with the idea that you could actually understand how many things work from a very quantitative perspective, it was really a big discovery that you could write down equations that quantitatively describe how things function. And that was a revelation. And
there's actually an order to everything that happens, right?
Exactly. The world is not random. There is structure, and you can learn that structure.
Is it not random,
Yeah.
or is it in the end? I'm kind of digressing here, but when you go to to quantum mechanics, it looks like more random than anything else. But
that's right. But even the randomness itself has a pattern. That's the key. It's not randomness as in no pattern in the randomness. There's still patterns, and I guess the key or one of the keys of science is try to discover those patterns. Yeah.
Nice. Very, very nice. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have Tiberio growing up as doing research in physics, and then at some point you were telling us that you decided to do a PhD. Which then, what was it about?
So my PhD was in artificial intelligence. This was already starting around 2000. Yeah, over 20 years ago now. And my interest was to understand. It was clear to me that there were problems for which the human capacity to find patterns wouldn't be enough to solve those problems. Humans are really good pattern detectors, and humans are scientists and like to find patterns and find patterns everywhere, and structures, and find equations that describe reality and nature, that sort of thing. But as you start to get out from the domain of physics and you go into more complex domains where it's hard to find the equations. For example, as Feynman famously said, I mean, physics would be much, much harder if electrons had feelings, right? So if you start to understand, instead of how an atom works, try to understand how a society works, then it's really hard to find the equations that govern society. You need to do something different, right? And what you need to do, you need to look at data. But there's so much data that you can't really make sense of it. You need to find ways to delegate these analyses of that data to brains, so to speak, that are more powerful than yours.
Right.
And the problem is that we haven't found, yet extraterrestrials which we can enslave in order to solve our problems, so to speak. So we have to create intelligence, right? So we have to create superior intelligence that's able to identify patterns that exist, and yet the human mind is not powerful enough to find them. And the only way to do that is through computers, of course. So I reckon, okay, so let's go through this route of computers and try to see how far we can get by getting to get computers to analyze patterns. So I started to work in this field of pattern recognition, and what later became known as more broadly as machine learning as well, which is a science, a fundamental science that tries to use fundamental statistical ideas and fundamental computational ideas from computer science, bring those together so as to be able to find patterns that humans cannot find easily. And then the game really changes, because it's almost as if you now have a new eye that can see new things that you didn't have before. Like when we created microscopes or telescopes, we could have access to worlds that were invisible to us prior to that.
Exactly.
Same thing. Yeah.
That still amazes me how, for example, I mean, I'm going to give you a very user-based example, not a science-based example, but I'm always amazed as how Google Photos, for example, is able to recognize. We have 3 dogs here at home, like the kids love them. And my daughter created an album, so Google can automatically allocate each dog to their specific albums. And and so 2 of them are very similar. They kind of the same breed, and I'm kind of amazed at how Google can recognize and differentiate those 2 dogs, which to me sometimes is pretty hard. And
yes, it is amazing, and that's an application of machine learning, as we call it today, and the way we can obtain those results is we need 3 things. We need lots and lots of data about what dogs are, about things that look like are dogs,
mm-hmm.
and also things that are not dogs. And then you need computers to process that data, and you need an algorithm that tell the computer, well, this given this group is a dog and this group is not a dog, I'm trying to find this particular pattern that is typical of dogs, that's not typical of things that are not dogs. And whenever that pattern is present, guess what? It's a dog.
Yeah, but not only that, it can actually tell which dog it is. That's amazing. But then, how did you? Well, at some point you became an entrepreneur, and was that related to this research, or did it come from another walk of life, or how did that happen?
It was related, because after my PhD, I became essentially an academic researcher, working for several years in a research institute here in Australia, where I live, and in that research institute, it was a very large research institute. It had many researchers devoted to machine learning research. I was one of them. And that research institute also had a entrepreneurial arm, so to speak, or a commercial division.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was indeed great. And basically what happened was that if some ideas or some know-how coming from the research teams was seen as having some potential commercial value, or if the researchers themselves had ideas that they wanted to push to a more commercial initiative, then there was this opportunity, and that's
So,
exactly what happened in my case.
so in the institute had like a team or some people that were dedicated to learning what the researchers were researching and figuring out if that research would have potential for to be licensed. Is that what they did? Like,
Yeah. Similar to that, there was a culture that was both a culture of excellence in research and excellence in entrepreneurship or wealth creation, as we used to call it.
right.
So really the researchers and the entrepreneurs, they inhabit the same building and they would talk to each other every day, that sort of thing. So there was an appropriate environment for that. Very
like
unusual.
a matchmaking kind of system, like the entrepreneur was not necessarily a researcher, right?
No, not necessarily a researcher. That's right. So, but it was not scripted. It was very organic. So basically there were research projects, and some research projects were very, very much fundamental and more theoretical. Other research projects were more applied. And usually those more applied research projects, they more easily came to the radar of the more entrepreneurial folks who could see potential opportunities there. And that's how things commercial opportunities emerged. And that's how my first venture emerged. In fact, I came to start having conversations with a couple of engineers who had a very entrepreneurial spirit. And we identified an opportunity in the market at the time, which was that large organizations like telecommunications providers and media companies and banks and insurance companies and retailers, they had lots of data about their customers. And this was in 2011 or so, 10 years ago. So in those days, things were very different than they were today. They had the data about the customers, but they didn't know how to use the data so as to improve the business, how to seize the value, the hidden latent value in those data sets to actually support the business to further improve the services to the customers. For that, of course, you need to analyze patterns. You need to analyze patterns in the data and figure out what each customer needs. And that's how our expertise came to that.
So let me try and understand. Like, so the company was created to help other companies deal with their data, or was
Correct.
there a company already that was having difficulties dealing with their data, and then they decided to start a venture? How was the process?
I'll explain how it all started. We started as a consulting project. It all started as a consulting project with a bank. So the bank knew that they had all this data. They didn't know what to do with it in order to improve their services. But we had the know-how, and the know-how that was built through the research, the machine learning research that we had been doing.
Right.
So that it was really the know-how built during those years of conducting that specific kind of research.
How did you get to find out that the bank had a need? Was there like the institute that also made them match, or did you start?
No,
did you start selling? Yeah.
No, this was one of my partners, one of these two engineers that I partnered with, the core initial team that started the company. He was very active in the community, seeking in business development and trying to talk to different clients to identify potential needs in the market. And he identified that this company was actually very cognizant of the hidden opportunities that were there, and they didn't know what to do. So yes, it was some sort of natural process that emerged from a colleague of mine having this very proactive attitude towards talking to companies and identifying the gaps, and in a way convincing the companies that actually they had a massive opportunity that could be actually seized using the kind of expertise that we had.
Mhm.
And then we started that consulting project, and very soon it became very clear that the potential for the bank, that the potential was much more significant than they even originally thought. And I think it's fair to say that that project in that bank that originated about 10 years ago with 3 or 4 people working on it, today is a function of, probably several hundred people.
Wow.
Just working, or maybe even more than 1,000 people. I don't know.
Oh,
Just as an outgrowth of that.
so it started as a consulting project.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even a company yet. It wasn't like a consultancy. It was like a
No.
consulting project.
It was a consulting project. Yeah,
for
it started
the
as a
bank.
consulting project.
And
for
then
the
at
bank.
some point, it became a company that also helped other
Correct.
companies.
Exactly. So at some
Also
point,
providing consulting projects. So it was a consultancy.
Initially, yes, it was fundamentally a consultancy, but there was a product that we wanted to create. So we needed to create a product to enable that the consultancy work. Essentially, in order for us to deliver the consultancy work effectively at scale, we needed to develop a product which ended up being a cloud service that would, this was early 2012 and so on. We still, in those days, we didn't have the cloud infrastructure that we have today. In those days, you could pretty much just store data and do a little bit more than that. Today, you have everything, right? So basically, in those days, we had to hire, then we started hiring engineers to actually build the cloud infrastructure that we needed in order to do machine learning at scale in the cloud, collecting data from these companies.
In real time, kind of like
we would, it was not real time because the kinds of interventions we were looking at were like changes that happen on a daily basis and so on. Like, for example, you want to decide if you're going to send an SMS to a client to notify that this bill is overdue, or you want to make a price change to a product, or you want to reconfigure a product. So you need to communicate with your clients through either SMS or send a message to the inbox, or that kind of interaction, customer relationship management, which doesn't need to be real time, but more the clock is more like on a daily basis or on an hourly basis. But
you had to be integrated. Right.
Had to be integrated. You had to have a closed loop system, basically, where you would collect, one day you collect the data from the company, you push the data to the cloud, next you do the processing, the next day you send back to the frontline systems of that company automated decisions about what should be done, which customer should receive which message, which customer should receive which promotion, which customer should be called to let them know that they need to make this payment.
And by customer, you mean bank account holders? Like
bank account holders,
regular people.
Regular people, like you and me.
Like the bank was interacting with. And what years are we talking about here? So we have like
so this was around 2000.
Technology was.
Yeah, this was around 2012. So it's essentially 10 years ago. And
that's exactly when I was starting one of the most successful company, Medicina. Like that's exactly when I was starting it. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. In those days, the cloud was starting to become a big thing, of course, but there wasn't too many tools to actually, all these machine learning tools that we have today. And you mentioned the recognition of different breeds of dogs before and so on. We didn't have that at the time yet. So we needed to actually build the intelligence component, not only the infrastructure, but the machine learning component, to be able to recognize the patterns of spend of different customers, predict when they would likely need some help, or when they would likely need some particular type of message and so on. Yeah.
And then did the company, you said that the company eventually got more customers, more clients.
It did. We started with this banking client. Then we started to very, very quickly, in a matter of a year or two, we started to also get clients in telecommunications, in big media companies and big retailers, insurance companies.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a matter of a couple of years, we found ourselves in a situation where we really had these really large organizations that we were servicing with this platform.
Uh-huh. With the product that you developed, the scalable product that which is essential to scale anything up, right? Yeah.
Correct. And by then we needed, of course, to have hired several engineers. But at some point, the company had 35 engineers working on this project, and a few scientists like me, a smaller team of data scientists that would conceptualize the models and do the machine learning design and the algorithmic design, and then the engineers had to actually ensure that design was implemented at scale and accurately and effectively.
Right. And how did you feel, Tiberio, going through this process of becoming an entrepreneur? Was it creating any anxiety, or it's kind of a different world, right? So very different from academia, because at some point, all of a sudden, you find yourself having to provide very substantial results for these clients, because otherwise they wouldn't be paying you anymore, or they will leave the company or leave as a client, right? It's a
exactly
different
right.
set of incentives comparing to academia, right? Very
I
different.
think yes, you're touching on a really important point. There is this fundamental difference in accountability, how accountability plays out in academia and in the business world and in the world of entrepreneurship. In academia, as we know, you are assessed by your peers. So basically, your reputation or your rewards, your incentives, they are all set up in such a way so as to please your peers, so as to convince people who do exactly what you do,
and build a reputation.
And build a reputation.
Yeah.
But the reputation is based on how well you can convince your peers that what you're doing is meaningful. Okay, it's not based on any direct contact with reality. It's not based with any test. And that's just how academia works. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong about it. It's just its nature, just like like a bird flies naturally, an elephant doesn't. The different animals that have different sort of natures, and the nature of academia is that. And of course, that has many upsides, but also many downsides. So the many upsides is that in academia, you do indeed, by not having that accountability to reality, you don't get the same types of pressures that you get. And you have the space and time, arguably, or at least not so much these days with how competitive academia has become, but
been changing.
There has been changing a lot, and I can speak a little bit to that as well.
That'd be great.
But at least in theory, I mean, you can at least carve out these spaces where you can actually be yourself and talk to your own self and be authentic in the production of your ideas and the development and the expression of your ideas. And of course, there are downsides, which naturally I referred to before, which is this very detachment from reality, which benefits creation. It also is a risk, because oftentimes what happens is, once you've conceived your ideas, you've expressed them, and you try to get in touch with the real world and try to find ways to manifest that idea in the real world, you suddenly realize that it doesn't quite work the way you expected, because naturally you've made a number of assumptions that don't hold in the real world. Those kinds of downsides. Now, the accountability in what I learned in actually becoming an entrepreneur was that there is a different kind of accountability. Now the accountability is with your clients as opposed to your peers. And your clients are fundamentally different from your peers, right? Because your clients, they are not playing the same game as you are playing. Whereas in your peers, you're playing the same game. So you're trapped into the same game, and that game can become as detached from anything real as possible. Whereas the game that the clients are playing is actually serving their clients. Now suddenly there is a link with the real world. And those clients are probably serving other clients and so on and so forth, right? So, and then you're now connected with the web of the economy,
right,
more organically. So now you have this very different type of accountability. And I love to speak about the different types and how I see those two different types.
Did you leave academia at all, or you trying to combine the two worlds at the same time and live with two different sets of values?
It's a good question. I see myself as a very hybrid sort of person, and I did maintain and I still do maintain to some extent my connection with academia. Sorry. But it is challenging. It is challenging because the games are different. You're playing different games, and each game has its own rules and its own incentives.
They conflict many times.
And they naturally conflict.
Yeah.
If very rarely you can identify these little niches where you can actually get some leverage from one domain to the other. But my personal experience was that those are unusual occasions. Yeah.
You mean the opportunity for leveraging is unusual? For leveraging for combining the what do you mean that?
I found, in my personal experience, I found that there are these two big stars, two big sort of gravitational pulls. One coming from publish more papers, and the other coming from get more clients, make more money, right? And often those things don't align. So you need to, if you want to maintain some level of research or publishing or engagement, you actually need to almost make a commitment, a personal commitment to doing that, in spite of, and take some losses, and just accept that you want a few hours or 1 day a week or a few hours a week, you just won't do any work related to your business.
And the opposite is also true, right? Because if you continue to do some research, then you have to accept some losses on the business side.
Correct, indeed. So there are these fundamental trade-offs. It is difficult to do proper business and proper research simultaneously. So I did persist and continue to publish some papers, but not at the same rate as before. But really my main focus became creating different kinds of impact other than publishing and supervising PhD students, creating impact from a different kind of impact, you know, impacting through the clients and the customers, and yeah, it's a different kind of impact.
What do you do? Well, let's continue the story of the company, because I was interested in what you do most today, what eventually became of Tiberio. But there's more to the story, right? So we are at that point. We are at the point where okay, you started as a consultant with a consulting project. The consulting project became a consultancy. The consultancy built a product that was scalable, and then the consultancy started selling to many different clients in many different industries. And then what happened?
Interesting. And then at some point, one of our clients approached us with an offer to acquire the business. They realized the value that the business was creating above and beyond the specific service that we were providing to that client specifically.
Was it the first client or another kind of client that came later?
No, it was not. It was not the first client. It was a client that came later. And this client was in the insurance industry, was a very large insurance provider, and they realized, they had a vision to realize that what we had could become a source of a mental shift and perhaps a paradigm shift in the way they thought about data and AI. This in 2014.
They understood that the technology you had developed and the services were potentially transformational for that industry, for the insurance industry. So much so
Correct.
that they wanted to have that capability in-house instead of hiring a third party as your company. Is that
correct?
Is that like
that's correct.
Right? Okay. And then they made
exactly right.
A proposal, like
they made an offer. Then after some initial negotiations, we agreed to sell the business in 2014. And after the sale of the business kept growing. I personally still worked within the business for about 3 years after the sale of the business. And then during that period, of course, I learned much more about
insurance. At that time, how big was the company? How many people worked the company?
Well, eventually, when we sold the business, we were just 12. Mm-hmm. And then, already 12 from the 3. And then then at some point, we had 35 people in the business. And then by then I was already leaving the company. Mm-hmm. So the company is still running. I'm no longer there. I've had my time there, and I was one of the founders, and I was one of the people responsible for securing the sale of the business, and worked there I was its first chief scientist who sort of
because you were critical, like a critical piece of the science background of the company, right?
I was the first person responsible for the science of the organization and to ensure that the scientific practice was up to scratch, so to speak. Yeah.
Were you happy with the entire process? Like, did it happen to your? Sometimes when people sell companies, they do it because they don't see another way, or because they don't want to keep growing a company, which is like has a. Sometimes you just take the opportunity because it's not every day that someone shows up willing to buy your business. For example, if they had they not bought your business, they probably would have developed the expertise in-house. It could have taken longer, but eventually the technology, the world catches up, right? So what was the rationale and what was the motivation for you to sell it? And were you happy with it? And were you happy with the entire experience? Would you have done it again? Like.
Yes, I think we were very fortunate with the timing of the sale. At the time, our view was that we needed to sell. It was an appropriate time to sell the business because it was getting sufficiently big so that without additional resources, we wouldn't be able to truly grow the business the way we actually wanted to grow. And the internal team was was ready for that transition. So it was an unanimous agreement that it was a suitable time to sell the business, and our view was as well. We had this view of that, you're creating something. It doesn't mean necessarily you want to sell your soul to that creation.
Okay.
You're creating something. You want to get that something out, like a child. You want that child to go out to the world. You don't want that child to depend on you for the rest of your life. That was my attitude. Yeah.
This is great because I've always seen my ventures as my children. And probably because they give you so much work, as much work as your actual children give you, more perhaps, or because they are always in the way of you, like when you have to decide your time allocation. So how much time am I going to allocate to my family, to my children, to my company? It's kind of at the same level, right? It's like your career and your family, that kind of same, those decisions that you make all the time, how much effort and energy to dedicate to each part of your life. But
very true. Very
yeah,
true.
companies are like children. They have like different stages, growing stages, where they start as an infant, as a baby, and then grow into a toddler, and then all of a sudden they are teenager going to university. I have that same kind of feeling with my ventures as well.
Yes, and just like different parents have different styles of, being more and more attached to the kids after they're adults or less, or let them go out by themselves and so on. I think different founders also have different styles. There are founders that are very emotionally attached to their creation and really want to persist pushing that. They believe in that, and they don't want to actually try something different. And others are different. I mean, in my case, I'm an explorer. I consider myself forever a curious explorer, and I can't see myself doing anything for indefinitely. I need to learn from different kinds of experiences from time to time. Yeah.
It's very clear that you were curious and you're driven by that curiosity. Probably more than the money you're gonna make if you're persist in a given project. Am I right by saying that? Because I mean, people,
yes,
they have different drivers, right? Like they're driven by different things.
They are. I mean, clearly on the money side, only very late in my life I realized that money was important. Until
it does make a difference, right?
It does make a difference. It's like potential energy, as we call in physics. You have potential energy and you have kinetic energy or heat or other forms of energy, right? So money is like potential energy. You've got, certainly if you have more money, you have more potential to do things.
Exactly.
But how wisely you transform that potential energy into kinetic energy, that makes a big difference.
What is the most important potential energy? Because as you're telling us before, like there is the company is your creation, and but it is your creation, not you need money to create a company, but it's fundamentally your creation and not the money's creation, right? So the money is more like the consequence, and
it's a good way to put it. I mean, perhaps I don't know. I mean, I think you could create some different metaphors, such as, you need some sort of you need, like, if you want to create a new venture, you sort of need resources, things that without which the venture cannot grow properly. But then you have this sort of sparks, almost like, if you want to build fire, you need resources like oxygen, but you also need a spark. So you may have all the oxygen in the world, but without this spark, you're not going to make fire. So, and the spark, in the case of humans, is this vitality, is this creativity. It's a combination of vitality with creativity, with sometimes even obsession, to come up with something, to solve a problem, or to create something. And naturally, that is required, but so is the oxygen, so is the minimal resources.
Which
you
is
need the right
the
people. Yeah. But the money you need, sometimes you don't need much money to get started, depending on which business you're talking about.
If it's a consultancy, you need more you than money. But if it's for other kinds of business, if it's a product that you need to prototype or something that you're going to manufacture, then money becomes much more critical, right?
That's right. But we should notice that the money is not the problem, if you think about it, because there's no short supply of venture capitalists out there. Right?
Yeah, it became a commodity these days.
Yeah, so money is really not the problem. The problem is this whole idea of how do you come up with ideas that generally solve a market problem, the whole product market fit that people talk about forever and ever and ever.
It's a great challenge. Right?
Yes. So I think that's a really difficult question, and there's a lot of uncertainty in answering that question. I don't think no one can claim they know an algorithm that gives you very high confidence in how to build a company. I mean, this is largely very, very stochastic outcomes.
Do you see that machine learning could be helpful, identifying things that have more potential than others, finding market fit?
I believe that if you can predict better than using the traditional approaches, then certainly something like approaching the problem with machine learning and more data and good design may give you an edge in predicting, in getting that predictability. But the question of how much more you can predict is a bit of a vexed question. You know, some people think that, like, even if you think about the stock market, for example, you know, the efficient market hypothesis, you know, you have, you know, millions and millions and millions of people in this planet who, you know, their behavior suggests they don't believe in the efficient market hypothesis because they are actually betting on the market. They actually think they have specific knowledge that is not included in the price of the market. And there are some good reasons for that.
There's human nature, which is a mystery, right? And
that's right.
Why people do
absolutely
what they do, it's like a real mystery many times.
Absolutely. As the great biologist E.O. Wilson has a quote that I love, which says that the problem with humanity is that we have these Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies. And I think that says a lot because, you know, we have all this power with these technologies, but the institutions we have actually don't regulate those technologies very well, as we are witnessing now with the whole collapse of the information ecosphere. And likewise, our sort of human nature has got lots of traits that aren't necessarily very conducive to the improvement of the situation. So we have a big governance challenge.
Quite the opposite. And you mentioned to me some of the risks involved with technology and all of that. So let's get to that. So what happened to Tiberio after the sale? You continued to work at the insurance company, but then eventually you left. And then
Indeed.
What remained? the Tiberio, the academic Tiberio continued to exist, right? As far as I understand, but it wasn't. You weren't. You were forever changed, I think, because you didn't you didn't go back to being like a full-time academic, right? You, as far as I know. So what happened to you?
That's right. That's an interesting story. So in our work in that company that I mentioned, the insurance company acquired our business, but we didn't only work for the insurance. We had several clients in a number of other sectors. The insurance company that acquired us continued to be one of our customers, one of our clients, but we still
did the other
continue.
I mean, was the company totally absorbed by the acquirer and stopped providing services to other industries, or did it continue to provide services to other clients?
It became a wholly owned subsidiary of the acquirer, but it continued to serve all the clients that it still had up to that point. So the brand continued to be the same. There was basically no change in the branding, no change in the operations, just the ownership of the company was changed. So in that process, in the process of optimizing, using machine learning to improve, so to speak, the operations and business objectives of these several organizations that we had, we started to notice some problems. Because you see, the fundamental service we were providing was what we could call automated decisioning, or AI-driven, machine learning-driven decision-making. If you have to decide which customers are going to have an increase in their insurance premium this year and by how much, it was an algorithm determining that. If you had to decide which customers are going to be called today to remind them of overdue bill, it was an algorithm that was going to decide when to send that message and so on and so forth. So this process of automating the decision-making of these companies.
Okay.
And the machine learning driving these decisions was told a very simple story. When you design a machine learning system, differently from traditional software design, what you specify is not the steps of what the computer should be doing. What you specify is what is the objective that the computer should pursue. And you provide data to give the computer the context so they can understand the customer context and the entire sort of have visibility about the reality of that context, so as to make a decision that maximizes conversion rates or maximizes revenue or maximizes some proxy of profit.
Right. But what is the problem?
The problem is that when you tell a salesperson, sell more, something will happen. But when you tell a computer, sell more, something very different will happen. You see, if you tell a person or an insurance broker or a salesperson, please get as many sales as you can this month and your bonus is going to be tied to the sales. They will go out, they will give calls to a number of customers, they will try to push that sale. And in doing so, yes, they may be a little bit forceful, sometimes even a bit dodgy and so on and so forth. But they are people, and people have a social, moral understanding of the world. They know they cannot break the law, for example. They know that in the process of going out selling insurance policies, they cannot point a gun to someone and say, sign now this contract.
But can AI point a gun at someone?
In a certain sense, it can. Why? Because when you design a computer algorithm and you tell that algorithm, maximize profit, and you provide all this data, what do you expect the computer to do? The computer, yes, will try to maximize profit, but it doesn't have that thing that the human has, which is the entire context of the world in which it lives.
But it does have boundaries, doesn't it? Like, or leverages that it can use and others it doesn't have access to.
Well, computers haven't been programmed with the details in anti-discrimination law. They don't know anything about commercial law. They don't understand the moral sort of values of the society in which they are embedded.
So are you saying that your creation kind of became a little monster, or?
In a certain sense, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was really good to discover that very early on, because unfortunately, that's the reality in which we live today. What I was doing 10 years ago and figured out about 5 or 6 years ago that there were issues with, most organizations today haven't yet realized that if you program a machine learning system to maximize sales of home loans, for example, while trying to ensure that you don't lose money and try to maximize profit and so on. Many organizations don't understand that you can inadvertently, the algorithm can inadvertently deny systematically sales to a certain traditionally underrepresented group in society that in the past didn't get loans, not because of their own lack of ability to repay the loans, but simply as a result of human biases in the past that haven't actually given loans to people who don't look like.
Representation is a major issue.
It is a major issue. The fact that we live in a society, we live in a society that's very, very unfair. Very unfair.
But at the same time, the issue was already there, right? Because those prejudices were already part of the salespeople. So isn't there an opportunity to identify those and recreate those algorithms so they can be unbiased? So we can actually have a better world than we had before?
That's what the new venture is about.
Okay, so tell us about the new venture.
So the new venture is about we realizing that there are these issues with automated decision-making, that these issues are very fundamental and we need to attack them head on. So around 2016, we started pushing for and trying to talk to different potential funders to essentially support us in the creation of a new institute, a research institute. This time would be a not-for-profit institute focused on the responsible use of AI,
that's awesome.
The ethical use of AI. And that's what I help run today. So that's an institute based here in Australia called Gradient Institute. And it's focused on how do we ensure that the design, the development, and the application of machine learning and AI systems is done in a way that has social license, that's legal, that doesn't break the law, that actually works towards the benefit of the customers and society as a whole, without unfair discrimination, without treating people in ways that the law wouldn't allow them to be treated. And this is difficult because it's not like you want these problems to happen. It's just like it's really hard to encode our morality, so to speak. It's really hard to represent ideas of ethics and fairness
in computer morality code. To start with, right? So I think that the problem starts even before you do any coding at all.
That's a very good question. The question of legitimacy of whose voices are you going to listen to? Which morality are you going to encode? Which legal principles are you going to enforce? Arguably, if you are operating in a jurisdiction like Australia, you are going to have to obey certain principles that are different from if you are deploying a system in Singapore, for example, or in other jurisdictions. So you have to be attuned to those different constraints and the different contexts in which the technology is going to be applied, and have to find ways to legitimize the use of your technology in that particular context. And that's what the new institute is about. So we build tech to enable, to facilitate the process of designing AI systems that take into account these moral stances, these moral aspects. We want these systems to be fair, to be transparent, to be accountable, so that it can minimize the harm that is created on the people which the systems are making decisions about.
Awesome. This is very, very nice, Tiberio. So we have here a person, Tiberio, who is academic. You are an academic to this date, is that right? You told us you continue to have appointments in like a relationship with academia, who has been a for-profit entrepreneur and a non-profit entrepreneur as well. So would that be your main project today, the Gradient Institute?
That's my main focus of attention these days, indeed. It's the Gradient Institute.
Which is supported by corporate sponsors. Is that right?
It's supported by corporate sponsors. It's supported. We have philanthropic support also from philanthropic organizations. We do have support from academia as well. University sector sort of provides facilities for us to do our research. And broadly, we also supported by our clients as well, as we do have clients who
so you provide services.
We do provide services as we help organizations, both government departments and the private sector, to help them to assess their systems that they are using to make automated decisions, and help support them in this trajectory of trying to ensure that those systems are more and more accountable, more and more transparent and fair to the broader society that they are serving.
Awesome. Is there any other thing that you like to share from your experience with aspiring science entrepreneurs? Is there any message? I usually like by at the end of my videos to support a cause. One cause that I like a lot is the dark skies, and I like to support the dark sky, the International Dark Sky Association. I'm not like directly involved. I don't know who runs the institution, but I really like the cause, being an amateur astrophotographer myself. In you, I suspect you like to support your own cause, like your own not for profit. But
yes,
is there a message or something for other scientists that are considering to venture into venture building? So what would be that?
Yes, so I think the message general for scientists out there or getting out of their PhDs or already in academia and trying to ask themselves the question, what does the real world out there has for me? I mean, should I make this transition or not? So I think one message I would leave you with is, at the end of the day, the only way for you to know your own answer is to actually take the plunge. So basically to dive in and to expose yourself. Take the risk and be courageous. Because, humans have this natural aversion to risk. And there's this perception that going out to the market and becoming an entrepreneur is a riskier thing to do than staying in academia. Sometimes there is that vision or that belief and so on. But it has a great upside as well, which is it really strengthens your accountability. It helps you to understand what you're really good at. Because one thing I like to say to people is, if you are in academia working as a scientist, you are playing a single game. It's like you're playing a game of chess, and that's it. You're playing the same game forever. The same rules apply, and they apply for everyone equally. So your only option is to be better chess player, better chess player, better chess player. And guess what? Maybe there are many other people who are going to be better chess player than you are. And you have no option to switch from chess to checkers or backgammon or tennis or basketball or other games, because you've made this commitment to play that single game for the rest of your life that runs according to the same rules. In business, in entrepreneurship, you're not playing a single game. You choose the game you play. And in fact, if you start a company, a business in a sector and it doesn't work, you can move on and try something different in a different place. And the point is that you will be learning and learning more about you and testing your ideas about you and finding different games until you start to find games that you actually want to play, that actually align with your nature as a human being. So in other words, it's about trying to explore the world until you get enough close to yourself to learn who you are, to achieve your own best version of yourself.
It's a self-discovery journey as well.
Self-discovery, yes, and indeed, it's a self-discovery journey. And it's much more, it has that great upside of allowing you to actually, as you live, throughout your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, it never ends. You're always in this journey trying to figure out who you are, because you can play a different game every day. You can change the game you're playing.
That's great. And there's really no right age to start or right moment. It really, from my perspective, it really only takes the will and the passion to do something different and to go after it, right? This is awesome, Tiberio. Thank you very much. I'm going to make sure to add a link to the Gradient Institute below, and people through that, I'm sure it's super easy to connect with you too, for those who are interested in learning more and getting in touch.
Absolutely, get in touch with the Gradient Institute. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. It was
Thank
lovely
you very
chatting.
much, Tiberio. It was lovely as well. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye.